a weapon to be wielded, a tool to be broken. These were the unspoken words of the master, Darth Sidious, to the child he took from Dathomir. To be forged in another's fire is to be forever defined by the shape of your scars. And so, our story begins. Not with a Sith Lord, not yet, but with a child born on a world steeped in dark and dangerous magic. Dathomir. It's a place you wouldn't want to visit, not without a very good reason and an even better ship. The world itself seems to pulse with a strange, dark side energy, a palpable malevolence that hangs in the crimson mists and clings to the twisted, ancient forests. This is the domain of the Night Sisters, a matriarchal clan of witches who wield the dark side not through the rigid philosophy of the Sith, but as a raw, untamed magic. They are the rulers of Dathomir, and they rule with absolute authority. Their society is built around their power, and the male population, the Night Brothers, live in a state of carefully managed servitude. When the time for mating arrives, the Night Sisters descend upon these settlements and simply take their pick of the strongest. It's a brutal, efficient system designed to produce powerful offspring. Some decades before the Clone Wars would ignite the galaxy, a boy was born to the leader of the Night Sisters, the powerful clan Mother Talzin. The exact year of his birth is lost, a fittingly mysterious start for a life that would be defined by shadows and secrets. His father is unknown, a footnote in the matriarchal lineage of Dathomir. But from the moment he was born, this child was different. Mother Talzin, a being of immense power and foresight, recognized it instantly. She could feel his innate connection to the Force, a raw, palpable power that set him apart from all others. This child was special. This child was Maul, while his brothers, whom we would later come to know as feral and savage, were unceremoniously tossed aside and sent back to the Night Brother settlements. Maul was kept by his mother's side. Talzin cared for him personally, nurturing this burgeoning power, but such a potent flare in the dark side does not go unnoticed. Eventually, a visitor arrived on Dathomir. A human, cloaked and calling himself Darth Sidious, came to this isolated world, drawn by the power he could sense from across the galaxy. He sought out Mother Talzin, and in her he found a fellow master of the dark side. What must that first meeting have been like? It wasn't a negotiation between a galactic power and a local chieftain. It was a summit of shadows, two beings of immense and ancient power recognizing each other. Sidious showed Talzin his own abilities, the focused, disciplined power of the Sith, and Talzin in turn revealed the wild, potent magics of the Night Sisters. An agreement was struck, or so it seemed. They decided to share their knowledge, to combine the ancient teachings of the Sith with the deep-rooted magics of Dathomir. With this bond came a promise from the Sith Lord. He would take Talzin as his apprentice, his right hand, and together they would bring the galaxy under the joint rule of the Sith and the Night Sisters. It was an intoxicating offer, but was it ever real? Looking back, you have to wonder if either of them was being honest. Sidious is the master of lies, but Talzin is no fool. Was she truly deceived, or was she playing her own game, seeing a chance to place her influence and her son at the very heart of the galaxy's greatest power? Whatever her plans were, they were shattered. Because this was all a lie. Sidious had no intention of sharing power. He had felt the true prize on Dathomir. He too could sense the incredible potential radiating from the young Maul. Here was a vessel of pure, untamed rage and power. If trained from this young age, if properly forged in the fires of the Sith, he could become the most powerful apprentice imaginable, a true weapon. And so, Sidious took him. He simply took the child, invoking the Sith tradition of the rule of two as a pretense for his betrayal. Mother Talzin was devastated. Her trust, if she ever truly gave it, was broken, and her son was gone. Just as suddenly as he had arrived, Darth Sidious disappeared back into the void of space, taking the boy with him. It would be decades before Talzin would see her son again, but in that moment of betrayal, a new purpose was forged in her own heart. She would spend the rest of her life plotting that revenge, a quiet, simmering threat waiting in the shadows. But for Maul, his life on Dathomir was over. His childhood was over. His new life, a life of pain, anger, and relentless training, was about to begin. Sidious did not raise a son, he forged a weapon. The boy's mind, his muscles, his very connection to the Force were to be beaten, hammered, and quenched until all that remained was an instrument of his master's will. Every ounce of the child's natural anger and incredible athleticism was channeled, not into growth, but into a singular, destructive purpose. The training was relentless, a nightmare of endless trials. He was pitted against the galaxy's most fearsome creatures, armed with nothing but primitive tools and his own burgeoning rage. This wasn't about teaching him to survive. It was about teaching him that survival was synonymous with killing, that mercy was a flaw, and that rage was the purest source of strength. He was being hollowed out, filled with nothing but the dark side and the doctrine of his master. Eventually, the primitive tools were set aside. Sidious knew that a weapon of his caliber needed a signature blade, something that would announce the return of the Sith in a terrifying fashion. He introduced Maul to the double-bladed lightsaber. This wasn't some new invention. Sidious spoke of ancient accounts, of mythical stories passed down through the ages of the legendary Sith Lord Exarchon who had wielded such a weapon. It was a difficult blade to master, less wieldy, but infinitely more intimidating. In the hands of a purely offensive combatant, it was a whirlwind of death. It was perfect for Maul. It was a weapon for an assassin, not a duelist, designed to overwhelm and terrify an opponent before destroying them. As Maul's proficiency with the Crimson Blades grew, Sidious decided it was time for a different kind of lesson, a pilgrimage to a place of great and terrible power. He took his apprentice to the ancient Sith world of Malachor. The planet was a graveyard, covered in the petrified ash of a battle that had taken place millennia ago between the Sith and the Jedi. Dominating the landscape was the shadow of a great temple, a superweapon powered by kyber crystals that, when unleashed, had turned both armies to dust, freezing them in time. It was a design, Sidious noted, that would one day inspire a weapon on a much grander scale. But they weren't there for an architecture lesson. Sidious wanted Maul to feel a visceral, soul-deep connection to the ancient Sith he was born to avenge. He wanted him to experience the Jedi's attack firsthand, and so he made Maul do something unimaginable. He forced him to breathe in the literal ashes of a slain Sith warrior. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Maul's mind was torn from his body, plunged into a chaotic vision. He heard voices, ethereal chants echoing from an impossible distance. Far above, far below. They whispered, what once was great is rendered small. He saw the ancient Sith being cut down by the bright, clean blades of the Jedi. And then he felt it. He felt all of their pain at once, the agony of 1,000 lightsaber blades burning through his body, the shock and horror of 1,000 deaths experienced in a single, searing moment. When he snapped back to the present, gasping on the ashen ground of Malachor, something new had been ignited within him. A burning, all-consuming need for revenge against the Jedi Order had taken root in his soul. But Sidious, whoever the manipulator, knew that this fire had to be controlled. It had to be fueled properly, not allowed to burn out of control and risk their exposure. So, for several more years, there would be no Jedi killing. Maul was sent back to hunting the galaxy's deadliest beasts, creatures like the enormous Rathtars, honing his rage into a focused, lethal point. Maul, however, was growing impatient. In secret, he began to stalk Jedi just to prove that he could. He would shadow them, evading their detection, feeling the thrill of knowing he could swoop down and extinguish their light at any moment. When Sidious found out, he was furious. This wasn't the pride of a teacher seeing his student excel. It was the cold anger of an engineer seeing his tool malfunction. He warned Maul that if he continued to threaten the grand plan, if he risked revealing the existence of the Sith even a moment too soon, he would kill him himself. The message was clear: you are a component, and components can be replaced. To put his apprentice back on a leash, Sidious gave him a new task. A member of the Trade Federation, a valuable pawn in his long game, had been captured by pirates in the Killik system. Maul was to retrieve him. He arrived in his ship, the Scimitar, and made quick work of the pirates, cutting down a room full of them with effortless grace. But he was seething, frustrated by his master's restraints, his mind consumed with the lust to finally kill a Jedi. And in that moment, the dark side seemed to reward him. One of the pirates, confusing the red blade for a Jedi's, desperately begged for his life, telling Maul that he knew of a kidnapped Jedi Padawan who was about to be sold at a slave auction. This was it. The ultimate test. Not from his master, but from the Force itself. Concealing this information from Darth Sidious would be the first time Maul had ever deliberately disobeyed a direct order. Wanting to go and finally claim a Jedi life for himself, he knew he had to keep this new side mission an absolute secret. So, he murdered the Nemoidian he was sent to rescue, erasing the only witness to his new plan. As the life faded from the Trade Federation officials' eyes, a single thought crystallized in Maul's mind, a quiet declaration of independence that would define the rest of his life. My master has his secrets. So too do I have mine. His path took him to the infamous crime-infested world of Nar Shaddaa, the so-called Smuggler's Moon. Here, in the hazy glow of a cantina, he began his hunt for information. His methods as subtle as a hammer. Patrons were beaten for their silence, Maul's rage simmering just below the surface, held back only by the knowledge that igniting his crimson blade would send ripples across the galaxy, potentially reaching one of his master's countless informants. His brutal efficiency attracted the right kind of attention. A group of bounty hunters, including a Duros named Cad Bane, approached him, knowing of the auction and the criminals involved. A deal was struck, and they made their way to the Drexel system for the main event. The auction was a who's who of the galactic underworld, a gathering of criminal organizations that Maul would one day bring under his own control. As his dark side probe droid located the prisoner, he finally came face to face with his prize, a Jedi Padawan named Eldrakitis. He basked in her fear, the primal terror of a Jedi seeing a true Sith for the first time in a millennium. The moment was interrupted, however, when the auction's host set off a previously planted explosive and announced that the real prize was a hunt, with the bidders now free to go after the Jedi themselves. Hordes of hunters descended upon them. In a move of supreme confidence and calculation, Maul freed the Padawan and gave her back her lightsaber. For a few frantic moments, they fought back to back, a whirlwind of red and green against a common foe. all while knowing that their blades would eventually turn on each other. The fight was intense. Maul had to admit he underestimated her. She was skilled, surprising him with a force move that caused a small avalanche. But his raw strength did not fail him. He surged up through the rocks, and at last, the crimson blade of a Sith tasted the blood of a Jedi once more. His first kill, all behind his master's back. After paying off his bounty hunter allies and ensuring all loose ends were tied up, he made his way back to Coruscant, ready for his master's wrath. But the wrath never came. Instead, Sidious calmly brought up the slain Padawan, revealing that the entire scenario, from the pirate's convenient plea to the auction itself, had been an elaborate test. Sidious was testing not just Maul's skill, but his cunning, his independence, and his capacity for deception. He had passed, proving he was more than a blunt instrument. He was ready, but to ensure his apprentice truly understood the lesson, Sidious took him back to Malachor one last time. Again, the ashes transported his mind, but this time the vision was different. He saw himself as a heroic Jedi, a savior embraced with love and praise by a grateful family. Proud of himself for rejecting the comforting promise of the light, he drew on his rage and beheaded them in the vision, a final, chilling confirmation of his loyalty to the dark side. The lesson was clear: strength alone is nothing. The Jedi have numbers. His anger must be tempered with patience. Ironically, just as Maul finally learned this lesson, his master decided that the time for patience was over. Weeks later, the plan was set in motion. The Trade Federation blockaded the peaceful world of Naboo. Senator Palpatine, Sidious's public face, would manipulate events from Coruscant. The weapon that Sidious had been forging since childhood was finally to be unsheathed. Maul was tasked with hunting down the Queen of Naboo and the 2 Jedi who helped her escape. He tracked her ship to the desert world of Tatooine, where he unleashed his probe droids and raced across the dune seas on his speeder bike. As he closed in, he felt a vast disturbance in the Force, one that surprisingly came not from the Jedi Master, Qui-Gon Jinn, but from the small boy with him, a boy who would, 13 years later, become Sidious's most prized apprentice of all. Ignoring the strange feeling, Maul burst forward, igniting a single blade and unleashing a swift, powerful assault. Qui-Gon blocked the unrelenting barrage, but the sheer force-powered athleticism of the Sith was quickly draining him. He may well have been killed right there in the sand if the Queen's starship hadn't kicked up a blinding storm, giving the Jedi a chance to escape. Back on Naboo, Maul waited. Anticipating their return, he was sent to the royal palace to wait for the Jedi. Moments after their arrival, he challenged them in the palace hangar, both blades of his lightsaber activated. He was a storm of crimson energy, easily engaging both Jedi at once, expertly leading them through the blast doors and into the plasma refinery complex. This was his arena. He used the maze of raised platforms to try and separate Apprentice from Master, and then the facility's laser walls did the job for him. He and Qui-Gon were trapped on one side, Obi-Wan on the other. As the Jedi Master calmly knelt to meditate, Maul paced back and forth like a caged, wild animal, his patience, the lesson so recently learned, stretched to its absolute limit. When the gates lifted, his relentless assault continued. He found an opening. A swift strike, and he had killed a Jedi Master. Maul instantly turned to look Kenobi in the eyes, to savor the young Jedi's pain and shock. When the gates opened once more, it was Kenobi who channeled his rage into a ferocious attack, severing Maul's double-bladed lightsaber in half. But Maul was still the superior duelist. He kept Kenobi at bay long enough to land a powerful force push, sending the Apprentice flying into the reactor shaft, left dangling for his life. And here, in his moment of absolute triumph, Maul made his fatal mistake. He indulged himself. He casually kicked Kenobi's lightsaber into the abyss, choosing to toy with his final kill instead of finishing it. In that moment of hubris, Kenobi drew completely on the Force, launching himself up and over the stunned Sith, summoning his master's lightsaber to his hand and cutting Maul in two at the waist. Utterly stunned by this impossible defeat, Maul's body plummeted down the long shaft. That very same day, the man who had stolen him, the man who had forged him into a weapon, was elected Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. Maul's failure had ironically secured his master's ultimate victory. For a Sith, defeat is a concept more terrifying than death. As Maul's berserked body tumbled into the abyss of the Theed power generator, the galaxy seemed to shrink to a single point of searing agony and disbelief. He had been the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith planning, a perfectly honed weapon of revenge. To be broken so easily, so completely, by a mere Padawan was an impossibility. His indulgence in the final moment of the battle had been his undoing, a direct violation of the patience his master had so brutally instilled in him. While Sidious's own strategy of patience was, at that very moment, proving victorious with his election to Supreme Chancellor, his apprentice was left with nothing but the fall. But the blade that cut him in two also saved him. The intense heat of the lightsaber cauterized the wound instantly, preventing him from bleeding out as he fell, and in the darkness of the shaft, something else took over. It was more than just a will to live. It was a refusal to accept his fate. His mission, the singular purpose that had been beaten into him since childhood, was not yet done. Rage, pure and undiluted, gave him the strength to fight back against the oblivion that was swallowing him. As he plummeted, he used the Force, not with the grace of a master, but with the desperate, clawing instinct of a dying animal. He snagged a piece of ventilation tubing, pulling it towards him, his fingers latching onto the metal with a grip that defied his injuries. He began to climb. Through the grimy, mechanical bowels of the lower complex, he dragged the ruined remains of his body, driven by that one burning thought: revenge. Finally, after what could have been hours of agonizing effort, he found his way to a trash chute. He collapsed into a container, one of countless that were regularly shipped from the pristine world of Naboo out to a designated dumpster world in the Outer Rim. His destination was a planet called Lotho Minor. It was here, in a literal maze of galactic trash, that the once apprentice to the most powerful being in the galaxy would spend the next 12 years. Lotho Minor was a monument to decay, a scrap heap of a planet covered in mountains of discarded technology and rotting refuse. This became his world. He survived by hunting and eating the rodents and other vermin that infested the trash tunnels. His powerful mind, once filled with Sith secrets and complex combat strategies, fractured under the weight of isolation, starvation, and constant pain. He was driven to the very brink of insanity. The coherent thoughts of revenge became a manic, obsessive mantra, the only thing keeping him tethered to a sense of self. To move, to hunt, he crafted a grotesque new lower body, a set of 6 mechanical spider-like legs forged from scrap parts he found in the junk heaps. He became a monster, a creature of refuse and rage, half Zabrak, half machine, all broken. His days were a blur of pathetic survival and maddening visions. The chains he saw in his mind were the easy part. The real prison was the memory of his failure. He saw himself as both fierce and pathetic, a being deserving of greatness who was now nothing but trash. Even in this debased state, the Sith instinct for hierarchy remained. He found a twisted sort of apprentice in a sniveling anacondan serpent named Morley. Morley called him Master, and would lure other unfortunate scavengers into Maul's lair, feasting on the scraps the broken Sith left behind. It was a pathetic parody of the rule of two, a master and apprentice ruling over a kingdom of garbage. While Maul rotted, the galaxy moved on, believing the monster of Naboo to be dead and gone, but his impact lingered. 3 years after the battle, his ghost was still felt in the Jedi Order. A young Anakin Skywalker, in a move his master Palpatine found most impressive, even modified a training droid to look like Darth Maul to fight like him. The irony is almost too much to bear. As the true Sith Lord groomed his future apprentice, using the memory of his old one as a training tool, the original weapon lay broken and forgotten in a pile of filth, completely unaware that his legacy was being used to forge his own replacement. For 12 long years, this was his reality. A forgotten nightmare, crawling through tunnels of trash, his mind a shattered echo chamber of past glories and failures, whispering one word over and over again: Kenobi. But he was not as forgotten as he thought. Far away, on the misty world of Dathomir, a mother's magic began to stir. Mother Talzin knew. She sensed that the son who was stolen from her all those years ago was, somehow, still alive. For 12 years, the galaxy believed Darth Maul was dead. His own master had discarded him, and his enemies had forgotten him. But the Force does not so easily forget a wound of that magnitude, and the chain of events that would lead to his return was, with beautiful irony, inadvertently initiated by Darth Sidious himself. The Sith Lord, ever consumed by paranoia and the rigid doctrine of the rule of two, began to fear that his current apprentice, Count Dooku, was plotting to betray him. He suspected that Dooku was training his own dark side assassin, a former Night Sister named Asajj Ventress, to one day help him overthrow the Master. Such a threat to his grand plan, no matter how small, could not be tolerated. The command given to Dooku was simple and absolute. "You are no longer my apprentice," Sidious told Ventress through Dooku, "and now you shall die." The betrayal was as spectacular as it was brutal. Dooku ordered a separatist light destroyer to open fire and broadside Ventress's own capital ship. As if that wasn't enough, a hyena bomber was then sent to crash directly into her hangar bay, ensuring the resulting explosion would be utterly devastating. Dooku was convinced that Ventress was killed, but he underestimated the resilience of a daughter of Dathomir. She survived, acquired a ship, and fled back to the only home she had left. Her return to Dathomir set the wheels of fate in motion. When Mother Talzin learned how the Sith Lord had betrayed Ventress, she agreed to help the spurned assassin plan her revenge. Though their initial assassination attempt on Dooku failed, it left the Count vulnerable and, more importantly, in need of a new apprentice, and so Mother Talzin made him an offer. It's a masterful move when you think about it. She wasn't just helping Ventress get payback, she was playing a much longer game. Dooku, unlikely to have known much about Darth Maul's specific background, would have certainly known that the male Zabraks of Dathomir were highly trained and exceptionally fierce killers. Talzin offered him a gift, a new weapon, but it was a gift with strings attached, a plan within a plan where her magics would one day cause this new assassin to turn on his Sith master. Ventress was sent to the Night Brother encampment to select a candidate. As she watched the males compete, she found many of them to be pathetically weak. But among the handful she chose for the final trials were two of Maul's own blood brothers, Savage and Feral. Ventress, a powerful warrior in her own right, was easily able to best them all in combat. As she was about to deliver a killing blow to Feral, his brother Savage did something unexpected. He offered his own life in exchange for his brother's and challenged her to single combat. This incredible show of loyalty, this raw potential that flared up when he was properly motivated, was enough to impress Ventress. She still defeated him, but she had found her candidate. Savage was brought back to the Night Sister Temple, where he was subjected to an excruciating ritual. Using their dark magics, the witches transformed him, bloating his muscles, increasing his rage, and turning him into a powerful, monstrous beast who would obey their every command. To ensure his absolute loyalty and complete their control, they gave him one final, horrific test. They commanded him to prove he had left his old life behind by killing the very brother he had just tried to save. Placed back at Dooku's side, Savage spent months training under the Sith Lord. His homicidal rampages across the galaxy quickly drawing the attention of the Jedi Order. But the conditioning was not perfect. When Savage killed a target that Dooku had wanted captured alive, the Count unleashed his rage on the beast, attacking him with blast after blast of Force lightning. At that moment, Ventress arrived to activate her own enslaving command, but the fight dragged on. The sheer agony of being assaulted by both Dooku's lightning and Ventress's attempts at control was enough to shake him out of the spells cast by the Night Sister magic. In a blind rage, he turned on them both, fighting his way through Jedi and droids alike to escape the chaotic scene. He returned to Dathomir Aphalia, telling Talzin that he was not strong enough to defeat the Sith. But Talzin assured him that he had not failed at all. He had merely fulfilled the first part of his destiny. His true purpose was never to be Dooku's pawn. Now, she revealed the true secret she had been keeping. The real reason for this elaborate plot, his brother, the one he and Feral had long thought dead, was still alive, and it was Savage's destiny to find him. Together, she promised, they could have the revenge that was owed to them, revenge on the Sith cult that had used and abused them all. Handing him a talisman that would guide his search, Mother Talzin sent her newly empowered warrior out into the galaxy. The quest to find Maul had begun. Savage Opress's search for his brother was tedious and extensive. Armed with little more than a talisman from Mother Talzin and a newfound, desperate purpose, he scarred the outer rim. The talisman would finally glow, telling him when he was on the right world, a planet covered in endless miles of trash. This was Lotho Minor, the forgotten corner of the galaxy where his long-lost sibling had been left to rot. Here, in the maze like heaps of scrap, he was met by an anaconda named Morley. Morley, a slithering opportunist, offered to guide Savage through the tunnels, taking him to the very being he suspected was his brother. But this was a trick. Morley led Savage to a trapdoor, dropping him unceremoniously into the lair of a monstrous, spider-legged creature. The beast stalked Savage before striking, its speed and ferocity nearly overwhelming him. As the creature tried to rip him to pieces, the talisman around Savage's neck began to glow with an intense light. And in its glow, he saw the impossible. This wasn't just some random monster. This broken, manic creature with grotesque, self-made mechanical legs was his brother. Dumped here 12 years ago, Maul had survived by feasting on the scavengers and rodents that filled the junk heap. Morley, it turned out, was Maul's first twisted apprentice, calling him Master. as he led unsuspecting scavengers into the pit to be devoured, living off the scraps his master left behind. The brother Savage found was a shadow, his mind shattered by a decade of isolation and pain. The chains, he rambled, the chains are the easy part. He was a being trapped in a manic cycle, seeing himself as both fierce and pathetic, deserving of both greatness and the trash he lived in. As Savage tried to question him, he found that only one clear thought remained intact in his brother's fractured mind, a single burning purpose that had kept him alive. I must have revenge. This reunion, this collision of two brothers reforged by darkness, was so powerful that it sent a shockwave through the Force. Such an intense dark side awakening was felt by Master Yoda, meditating all the way back on Coruscant, who feared that the Sith he believed Kenobi had killed had somehow returned. With immense difficulty, Savage was able to get his brother on board their transporter and begin the journey back to Dathomir. Maul's fractured mind was a prison, torturing him with memories of his past, bombarding him with the cryptic phrase he was forced to learn as a child during his training on Malachor. What once was great is rendered small. When they finally arrived, Mother Talzin led him to the Night Sister Temple, which had been attacked by separatist forces during Savage's absence. She began a ritual, one similar to the excruciating transformation she had performed on Savage. Her powerful magics washed over Maul, clearing his tortured mind and pulling out the poisonous thoughts that had driven him to insanity. As his mind was healed, his body was reforged. Scrap parts from destroyed B-2 super battle droids were magically bound into place, forming a new, powerful set of legs. When Maul rose from the altar, he was whole. In that moment, Mother Talzin's form dissipated. Her physical body had been killed during the separatist attack, but her spirit had lingered long enough to see her son restored. For the first time since the Battle of Naboo, Maul was truly alive. He lamented the years he had lost, the destiny that had been stolen from him, but now his focus was singular and sharp. The rage was no longer the chaotic fire of a mad beast, but the focused heat of a smith's forge, ready to shape his own future. I was apprentice to the most powerful being in the galaxy once, he declared, his voice clear and steady. I was destined to become so much more, but I was robbed of that destiny by the Jedi, by Obi-Wan Kenobi. His first order of business was simply get the Jedi's attention by slaughtering innocents and sending a message to the temple, instructing Kenobi to come alone. The hunt had begun again, but this time it was on Maul's terms. The first step in Maul's new quest for revenge was to get Obi-Wan Kenobi's attention. This was achieved through a brutal, galaxy-wide broadcast of him slaughtering innocents, followed by a direct message to the Jedi Temple instructing Kenobi to come alone. The Jedi Council was wary. Mace Windu thought his capture was too important to risk a single Jedi. But Yoda, perhaps sensing the hand of the Force at play, sided with Kenobi. When Kenobi arrived to confront the ghost from his past, Maul feigned ignorance, a cruel psychological jab. I'm not sure I've made your acquaintance. The rage this elicited from Kenobi was palpable, but before a duel could truly begin, Savage appeared, and the two on one assault was more than the Jedi Master could handle. He was easily beaten down by the sheer strength of the brothers. But the galaxy is a complicated place, and enemies can make for strange allies. The fight was interrupted by Asajj Ventress. She wasn't there to help the Jedi, she was there to collect the 1 million credit bounty the Sea Ice had placed on Savage for his betrayal. Her arrival was a chaotic whirlwind, and her first act was to simply troll the furious Dabrax. Like your new legs, she quipped at Maul, they make you look taller. Seeing a common and very large enemy, she teamed up with Kenobi, giving him one of her sabers. The fight became a blinding flurry of crimson blades. But even 2-on-2, the pure strength of the brothers was too much in the tight quarters of their ship. Maul tried to fill Kenobi with rage to knock him off balance, taunting him about his master's death. I gutted him while you stood helpless and watched. Realizing they could not win, Ventress and Kenobi made a desperate run for an escape craft, barely jettisoning in time. Savage was eager to pursue them, but Maul, perhaps for the first time, displayed the patience his old master had tried to teach him. I've waited so many years for my revenge. He told his brother, I can wait a little longer. But this didn't mean he would be idle. He and Savage went on a Jedi killing spree across the galaxy, specifically hunting down pairs of masters and apprentices, during a raid on a banking clan transport to gain credits. Maul decided it was time to formalize their relationship. He put the brother that had saved him into the proper place of an apprentice, invoking the Sith tradition he knew so well. Always two there are. My brother, he stated, master and an apprentice. This marked the true beginning of Maul's rise as a new power. Their next move was to build an army. They lured Weequay, pirates, into a trap, offering them great riches to betray their leader, the infamous Hondo Ohnaka. But Hondo was not so easily impressed, alerting Kenobi to the betrayal. What followed was a massive battle. The Jedi Adi Gallia was killed by Savage, but Hondo ultimately outsmarted the traitors and reclaimed control of his men. In the chaos, Kenobi was forced to fight the two brothers alone once more. Though Maul showed stunning strength in the Force, flinging the Jedi around at will, a quick move from Obi-Wan allowed him to slide under their blades and sever Savage's arm at the shoulder. Seeing his brother maimed and his plan failed, Maul and Savage fled. Their escape was cut short when a rocket launcher hit their ship, forcing them into an emergency escape craft that was not designed for interplanetary travel. Adrift in the void, with fuel and life support systems rapidly failing, it seemed their journey was over. But as long as Maul was filled with rage, he found a way to survive. Their salvation came from an unexpected source. A Death Watch patrol, having heard of the massive battle between Jedi, pirates, and mysterious red-bladed warriors, found their dying vessel. Their leader, Provisla, cut his way into the ship with a unique weapons, a black-bladed lightsaber known as the Darksaber. He was intrigued by these enemies of the Jedi. His logic was simple and opportunistic. If they're an enemy of the Jedi, then they're a friend of mine. The brothers were taken to a Death Watch camp, where Maul's legs were replaced with more standard humanoid mechanics and Savage was given a new robotic arm. Provisla explained his own cause, his hatred for the pacifist government of Mandalore, led by Duchess Satine, and their powerful allies in the Republic and the Jedi Order. He pointed out that they both shared a common enemy in Kenobi, who was personally leading the protection of the Duchess. A fragile, dangerous alliance was born. The alliance was one of convenience, forged in a shared hatred for a common enemy, but it was poisoned by duplicity from the very start. In a private meeting, Provisla laid out his cause to Maul, explaining how the pacifist Duchess Satine and her new Mandalorians had destroyed their warrior culture. Maul, seeing the path to Kenobi, quickly agreed to help, declaring Mandalore will be yours. But alone with his brother, the truth of his intentions was made clear. They would merely be using the Mandalorians as a tool to exact their own revenge. From the outset, Maul was not a partner, he was a parasite, looking for a strong host to carry him to his goals. He immediately began to assert his strategic dominance. He explained to Vizsla that while the Mandalorians were skilled warriors, they were not an army. To achieve their goals, they needed true military might, with supply lines and numbers of troops that Death Watch simply could not provide on its own. This was the first major ideological split between the two. Vizsla, the warrior, saw the path to victory through glorious combat. Maul, the Sith, saw it through the careful, patient acquisition of power. He was applying the lessons his old master had taught him about galactic conquest to the criminal underworld. Their first step, Maul declared, would be to visit the headquarters of the Black Sun crime syndicate on the volcanic world of Mustafar. One has to appreciate the symbolism. To begin forging his new empire of shadows, Maul chose a world that was a festering wound in the Force, a place of fire and death. They arranged a meeting with the syndicate's leadership, and in this confrontation, we see all the wisdom Maul had soaked up from Sidious over the years. He presented himself not as a conqueror, but as an opportunity. He offered them a place in his new order. But this was merely the pretense, the thin veneer of diplomacy that Sidious himself so often used before revealing his true, violent intentions. When the Black Sun leaders, predictably, refused to simply give up their operations, Maul's preferred method of negotiation was unleashed. Savage, acting as his brother's brutal enforcer, decapitated all of their heads in a single, terrifying moment, all except one. A single Fallen leader was left alive, not out of mercy, but for a calculated, strategic purpose. He would remain as the puppet leader over the Black Sun, a familiar face to keep the appearance of autonomy, while the real power rested with Maul. This was not the act of a simple thug, it was the cold, political maneuvering of a true Sith Lord. A direct page from Palpatine's own playbook. Vizsla was ecstatic. With the formidable forces of the Black Sun now under their command, he was ready to immediately launch their assault on Mandalore. But Maul contemptuously shot down this simplistic and naive response. The army is weak, he told the Mandalorian leader, his voice dripping with disdain. Your vision lacks clarity. This was more than a disagreement. It was a direct challenge to Vizsla's authority, a public declaration that Maul was the true strategist in this alliance. It was the first tremor through the fragile Sith-Mando partnership, a sign of the inevitable conflict to come. Maul explained that this was only the beginning. Before they could dream of taking a world as significant as Mandalore, they needed more power, more influence, more fear. Their new, combined forces would move on to absorb several smaller criminal enterprises, building their strength piece by piece, until their power was so undeniable that even their enemies would have no choice but to join them. Word began to spread through the underworld, whispers of a horned Red Devil who was systematically and brutally taking over the old order, forging a new power in the shadows, a shadow collective. Maul's brutal takeover of the Black Sun sent a shockwave through the galactic underworld. The old power structures, once thought immutable, were suddenly fragile. Fear, it turns out, is a powerful motivator for change. The story of the horned Red Devil spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before other major organizations began to take notice. The Pike Syndicate, a formidable criminal enterprise in its own right, didn't even wait for Maul's forces to arrive at their doorstep. They reached out and volunteered an alliance, choosing to join the rising tide rather than be drowned by it. And with that, the so-called Shadow Collective was truly born. With the Pikes and the Black Sun under his command, Maul set his sights on the ultimate prize, the final pillar of the galactic underworld that needed to fall, the Hutts. This was an act of supreme audacity. For millennia, the Hutt clans had been the undisputed leaders of crime. Their influence was so vast and their power so entrenched that Hutt space was considered an independent territory, untouched by the politics of either the Republic or the Separatists. To challenge them was to challenge a galactic institution. But Maul, embodying the Sith philosophy of absolute power, saw them as nothing more than the final obstacle to his complete control. The Shadow Collective descended on the planet Nal Hutta for a gathering of the criminal nobility, the Hutt Grand Council. Maul, flanked by his brother and his Mandalorian allies, strode into their court and made a simple, terrifying offer. "Your lives," he stated, with no room for negotiation, in exchange for Hutt space and everything in its borders. But there's a reason the Hutts have been dominant for so long. They don't acquiesce to threats. On their command, some of the galaxy's best bounty hunters emerged from the shadows and began to push back against the unwanted guests. The battle was the toughest the fledgling collective had yet faced, and they were nearly driven completely off the landing platform. It was only when Bo-Katan and her Mandalorian reserves swooped in on their jetpacks that the tide was turned, allowing them to fight their way back into the meeting chamber. The Hutts, however, were masters of survival, with what was likely a well-rehearsed emergency protocol for just such an occasion. While the fighting raged, most of the Hutt leaders successfully made it to their escape craft and were already off-world. All but one, a Hutt named Oruba, was captured and swiftly tortured into revealing the Council's destination, Tatooine, to the desert palace of Jabba the Hutt. The Shadow Collective pursued them there and, with their superior force, were able to easily take Jabba's palace. Faced with the reality that these unrelenting Sith and their Mandalorian army would not stop until every last Hutt was dead or allied, the Hutt Grand Council finally gave in. It wasn't a full takeover. It was an offering of tribute, a promise of troops and supplies to Maul's cause. The Hutts had bent the knee. With this victory, Maul's power was now immense. But as his influence grew, so did the tension within his own ranks. Previsla, watching Maul orchestrate this grand conquest, realized that the Sith's ambitions went far beyond simply helping him reclaim Mandalore. He was driven furious by Maul's declaration that he, Maul, would lead the criminal underworld, while the Mandalorians would serve as his protectors and enforcers. This was not the partnership he had envisioned. Later, in private, he confided in his lieutenant, Bo-Katan, that their alliance with these two, horned monsters, had a rapidly approaching expiration date. Once Mandalore was theirs, he assured her, Maul and his brother would be dead. The greatest threat to Maul's new empire was not the Jedi or the Republic, but the very tool he was using to build it. With the Hutt clans now paying tribute to his cause, Maul's criminal empire was a terrifying reality. At a combined rally at the Death Watch outpost on Zanbar, he finally revealed his grand strategy for taking Mandalore, and it was a masterpiece of political theater, a plan that reeked of the cunning manipulation of his former master, Darth Sidious. This would not be a straightforward military invasion. Brute force was for fools. They would conquer Mandalore not with an army, but with an idea. The plan was as brilliant as it was diabolical. First, the gangsters of the Shadow Collective would launch a series of devastating, high-profile attacks on the Mandalorian capital. The chaos and violence would make the pacifist government of Duchess Satine look too weak and incompetent to maintain control. Then, at the height of the crisis, Previsla and his Death Watch commandos would swoop in. They would publicly capture and arrest the criminals, restoring the order that Satine's wicked government could not. They wouldn't present themselves as conquerors, they would be hailed as saviors. Even Pre Vizsla and his lieutenant, Bo-Katan, had to admit that this was a great plan. It was elegant, insidious, and almost guaranteed to work. But this grudging respect did nothing to quell their treacherous intentions. Vizsla, ever the opportunist, confided in Bo-Katan that as soon as they had control of the planet, Maul and his brother would be publicly executed. He naively believed that, with the horned monsters gone, the various criminal syndicates would simply break up and disperse, allowing Death Watch to consolidate power cleanly. He was about to learn a harsh lesson about the nature of the power he was dealing with. On the other side of this fragile alliance, the conversation was nearly identical, though born from a much deeper understanding of politics and power. Savage, more of a blunt instrument like Vizsla, warned his brother that the Mandalorians obviously could not be trusted. But Maul was already several steps ahead. He explained to Savage precisely why they couldn't simply take the planet and rule it openly themselves. Doing so would draw the immediate and unwanted attention of the Jedi Order. They needed a puppet, a public face for their rule, and for now, Pre Vizsla was the perfect candidate. The full depth of the political wisdom passed down from Palpatine to Maul was on display, a lesson that even the brutish Savage was beginning to grasp. Vizsla was a temporary placeholder, a tool to be used and discarded once a more suitable replacement could be found. On Vizsla's mark, the plan was set in motion. The Shadow Collective descended upon key areas of the capital city, Sundari. The attacks were a calculated blitzkrieg designed to cause maximum panic and undermine the government's authority. Some were just open assaults on civilian centers, easily cutting down the official Mandalorian Guard. Others were strategic strikes against vital economic assets, like the central bank. As news of the chaos spread, Duchess Satine was forced to give an emergency address to her people, an address which Death Watch promptly crashed, positioning themselves as the voice of opposition. Satine pleaded with her people, warning them that siding with Death Watch would lead to the end of Mandalore, a tragically prophetic statement that she would not live to see come true. As the city teetered on the brink of collapse, Maul gave the order for the second phase to begin. Vizsla started staging theatrical apprehensions of the criminals. His Death Watch commandos, by some miracle, always seemed to show up at just the right place at the right time, efficiently subduing the off-worlder threat. Public approval for Death Watch soared. The people, terrified and desperate for a return to order, saw Vizsla as their strong, decisive leader. The final act was swift. Pre Vizsla led a charge into the royal court and announced the coup. "Your weak-minded rule of Mandalore is at an end," he declared to Duchess Satine. Outmaneuvered and defeated, she peacefully surrendered. That night, in front of a crowd of hundreds of thousands of cheering Mandalorians, Pre Vizsla was named the new Prime Minister, the celebrated hero who had saved them from the brink. His triumph was complete. All that was left was to take care of the final loose end. Maul was captured, paraded in front of the people as the criminal mastermind, and transported to the prison alongside his brother. He was exactly where he wanted to be. Pre Vizsla's triumph was a fragile, fleeting thing. He paraded the captured criminals, celebrated his new title as Prime Minister, and threw the two Zabraks into a prison cell, believing his coup was complete. But for Maul, this imprisonment was not a defeat. It was simply the final, calculated move in a much larger game. He and his brother were exactly where they wanted to be. Together, the two Sith were able to escape their cell with ease, their power far beyond the comprehension of their Mandalorian jailers. Vizsla's betrayal was not just expected, it was an integral part of Maul's plan. He had been a necessary tool to gain public support, but Maul had been planning his replacement all along. Their first stop was to locate their new pawns, a man named Almec. Almec was the perfect candidate to be the public face of Maul's rule. He had previously served as Prime Minister in Duchess Satine's government, but was imprisoned for establishing a black market after Mandalore declared neutrality in the Clone Wars. This act gave him a wonderfully malleable public image. In the eyes of many, he was a man of the people, imprisoned simply for trying to ease the suffering of citizens who had been cut off from Republic aid. Others, however, pointed out that he primarily smuggled non-essential luxury goods, and some of these goods ended up being toxic, nearly killing several children. This was everything Maul could have hoped for. A man who could be repackaged as a hero to the public, but who, at his core, was driven by luxury and greed. He was corruptible, controllable, and perfect for the role of puppet. With his new Prime Minister in waiting, Maul went to the throne room to confront Vizsla, and here he displayed a stunning understanding of the very culture he was seeking to dominate. He didn't just attack Vizsla, he leveraged the ancient Mandalorian codes of honor against him. "I challenge you," Maul declared in front of the assembled Death Watch, one warrior to another. "And only the strongest shall rule." It was a masterful stroke of political genius. Death Watch, a group founded on the return to ancient warrior traditions, was honor-bound to respect this right. Vizsla had no choice but to accept. He was trapped by the very ideals he claimed to represent. What followed was an intense and legendary battle, a clash between two ancient classes of warriors, Mandalorian versus Sith. The fight was also a duel between two of the most storied blades in galactic history. Maul wielded the crimson blade of a Sith, the first to kill a Jedi Master in over 1,000 years. Vizsla fought with the Darksaber, an ancient blade crafted by the first Mandalorian ever to become a Jedi, which was later stolen back and used as a symbol for the unification of all Mandalorian clans. The duel was close. Vizsla was a skilled and dangerous fighter, but Maul would not be denied. His Sith training, his raw power, and his burning purpose gave him the edge. He defeated Vizsla, forcing him to his knees just steps away from the Mandalorian throne he so desperately coveted. To his credit, Vizsla accepted his fate, upholding the warrior code to his last breath. Only the strongest, he conceded, and Maul executed him without hesitation. With that final act, Maul earned the Darksaber and, with it, the loyalty of Death Watch. He had not just conquered them with force, he had conquered them with their own traditions. But this victory was not absolute. Bo-Katan and a squad of loyal night owls would not stand down and accept an outsider as their ruler. The foundation of Maul's throne was already beginning to fracture. Almec was quickly moved into place as the new puppet leader, making a public address that conveniently left Maul's part in the story out of it. Mandalore had a new prime minister, but a secret, horned devil now sat on the throne. From his new seat upon the Mandalorian throne, Maul began to plot the expansion of the Shadow Collective, but his primary focus, the obsession that had driven him back from the brink of death and madness, was his ultimate vengeance on Obi-Wan Kenobi. While his puppet, Almec, handled the day-to-day operations of the government, Maul imposed a complete transmission blockage on the capital city, Sundari, isolating them from the outside galaxy. But he could not quell the dissent from within. Bo-Katan and her loyal squad of night owls refused to accept his rule, and, operating under the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, they launched a rescue mission to free the imprisoned Duchess Satine. They were pursued through the capital by those Death Watch members who remained loyal to Maul, their armor now repainted to represent their new secret ruler. During the chaotic chase, Satine managed to get far enough away to broadcast a desperate distress call directly to the Jedi Temple, asking for help from the one person she knew she could trust, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The trap was sprung. The message reached the Jedi Council, but as Master Ki-Adi-Mundi pointed out, because Mandalore had chosen to remain neutral in the war, this was considered an internal affair in which the Jedi could not officially get involved. This was exactly what Maul had anticipated. He knew of the history between Kenobi and Satine, and he knew that this political restriction, combined with the personal nature of the plea, would force Kenobi to come alone. Borrowing Anakin's old ship, the Twilight, Obi-Wan snuck onto Mandalore, incapacitating a dock patrol and donning a suit of Maul DeLorean armor to move undetected. He successfully located and freed Satine, but their escape lasted only moments. Just after takeoff, a pair of rockets slammed into their ship, sending it spiraling back down to the landing pad. Satine was badly injured, and Kenobi, his plan in ruins, was finally in his arch-enemy's grasp. "We meet again, Kenobi." Maul gloated as his forces surrounded the Jedi. "Welcome to my world." They were taken back to the throne room, and Maul savored every second of this triumph, a victory 12 long years in the making. He told the captive Jedi that he never planned on simply killing him. That would be too easy, too merciful. He wanted Kenobi to experience the same profound suffering that he had endured. He wanted him to feel what it was like to go from being powerful to being forgotten, to wallow in filth and starvation, to be driven to the brink of insanity. The rage that had sustained him for so long finally burst through. He used the Force to choke Satine, lifting her into the air as Kenobi watched, helpless. He could feel the dark side calling to the Jedi, a tempting whisper in his moment of agony. "Let your anger deepen your hatred," Maul urged. But even then, Kenobi's resilience was unshakable. He told Maul that only the weak give in to the dark side, and, in a final attempt to reach the person buried beneath the monster, he revealed that he knew of his origins. "I know where you're from. I've been to your village," Kenobi said, his voice steady despite the horror of the situation. "I know the decision to join the dark side wasn't yours. The Night Sisters made it for you." For a moment, it seemed to strike a nerve, but Maul's hatred was too deep, too absolute. "It was I who languished for years," he snarled, "thinking of nothing but you, nothing but this moment." With a final, cruel act, he used the Force to pull Satine's body onto the blade of the Darksaber, the ancient symbol of Mandalorian unification, now a tool for his personal, sadistic revenge. Mortally wounded, she collapsed into Kenobi's arms. With her final breath, the Duchess of Mandalore reassured Obi-Wan that she had never forgotten the love they shared, a love pulled apart by their duties to the Jedi Order and her people. As the throne room fell silent, Savage asked what should be done with the Jedi. In a final display of the cruel patience learned from his old master, Maul had Kenobi dragged away to be imprisoned. He knew that a quick death from a lightsaber would be a gift compared to the slow, agonizing torture of living with this memory. He would let his rival live, broken and alone, with the image of the woman he loved dying in his arms burned into his mind forever. Maul's revenge was a dish served cold, and he savored it with the quiet intensity of a man who had been starved for more than a decade. As Obi-Wan Kenobi was dragged away to a prison cell to live with his grief, Maul sat upon the Mandalorian throne at the absolute zenith of his power. He had his criminal empire, he had a warrior culture at his command, and he had broken his most hated enemy in the most personal way imaginable. But in the grand, churning ocean of the Force, such a monumental act of vengeance does not go unnoticed. It was a surge of dark side energy so potent that it finally caught the attention of the true master of the dark side all the way on Coruscant. Before the architect of his suffering could arrive, however, Maul's new empire began to crumble from within. During Kenobi's transport to prison, Bo-Katan and her Death Watch loyalists launched a daring rescue mission. Their success in freeing the Jedi pushed Maul to unleash his full guard of Mandalorians to pursue them, an act which immediately erupted into a massive battle between the two fractured Death Watch factions. The streets of the capital became a war zone, marking the beginning of the most recent and one of the most brutal Mandalorian civil wars. In the chaos of the battle, Bo-Katan made a decision that would change the course of Mandalore's future forever. She told Kenobi that he had to get the Republic involved, to plead with them to send an invasion force to oust the Sith Lord Darth Maul. She knew what this would mean. All will die, she admitted grimly, but Mandalore will survive. We always survive. While the city burned around him, Maul stood in the throne room and detected a different kind of disturbance, a sudden, cold dread in the Force. It was a presence of incredible darkness drawing nearer, a presence he hadn't felt since he was an apprentice. His moment of triumph was over. His master was coming. A single ship landed at the royal palace. Darth Sidious emerged, a quiet storm of absolute power. The palace guards, elite Mandalorian warriors, were effortlessly dispatched, tossed aside like dolls as the Dark Lord of the Sith made his way to the throne room. When he entered, the sight was telling. Maul, the conqueror of Mandalore, the head of the Shadow Collective, the great rival of the Jedi, immediately dropped to one knee, acting subservient to his old master. After all he had accomplished, after all his declarations of independence, the brutal conditioning of his childhood was still there, buried deep in his soul. He was still the apprentice. But Sidious was not one to be deceived. He looked upon Maul not as a prodigal son, but as a failed experiment that had somehow gained sentience and was now making a mess of his laboratory. This wasn't a reunion, it was pest control. Just moments after Maul had achieved the greatest triumph of his life, the victory he had clawed his way out of a garbage pit to achieve, his master was here to take it all away. He had come to Mandalore to personally dismantle his old tool, to remind the galaxy that there was only one Dark Lord of the Sith, and to put his rabid dog down. Savage Opress stood by his brother's side, and as the civil war consumed the city outside, the true battle for control of the dark side was about to begin. 5 crimson blades would clash in the throne room, but only one true Sith Lord would walk away. There was no more room for deception, no more pretense of subservience. The time for talk was over. What followed was a fight for the very position of the true Sith Lord, a maelstrom of crimson blades clashing in the Mandalorian throne room. Darth Sidious, who had spent decades cloaked in the drab robes of a politician, unleashed the full, terrifying extent of his power. He moved with a speed and ferocity that belied his age, his movements energized by his immense power in the dark side. This wasn't a grim duty for him, this was a joyous, gleeful expression of his absolute superiority. He laughed as he fought, easily parrying the brother's attacks, his two lightsabers a blur of deadly energy. He could hurl Maul across the room with a casual flick of the wrist, toying with the very weapon he had so carefully created. Savage, whose raw strength had been enough to overpower Jedi Masters, found himself completely and utterly outmatched. Against this old man, his brute force was useless. His powerful strikes were turned aside with contemptuous ease. Sidious's speed, strength, and pinpoint accuracy were simply on another level, and it was too much for the Night Brother to handle. In a sudden, brutal move, Sidious impaled Savage on both of his lightsabers, then sent his body flying out into the courtyard below. It was an execution, not a duel. In that moment, a flicker of the man Maul once was, the brother who had grown up on Dathomir, resurfaced. Just as Savage had once offered his life for his brother Ferrell, Maul now ignored the still present threat of his master and rushed down to comfort his brother in his dying moments. Savage looked up at him and with his last words revealed a sliver of the person he might have been. Through all the Night Sister magic, through all the Sith training and the rage, he knew he had never truly become a monster. And then he was gone. Maul's last connection to his family, the brother who had pulled him from the depths of insanity, was dead at his master's feet. With nothing left to lose, Maul called upon every last ounce of his rage to fuel his strikes. Now wielding the broken half of his original lightsaber and the Darksaber he had won, he was able to keep up with his master for a moment, even landing a powerful kick that sent Sidious staggering back. But Sidious knew that he could end this whenever he wished. Deciding the physical contest was over, he demonstrated his true mastery. He extinguished his lightsabers. He would end this with the dark side alone. What followed was not a fight, but a systematic and humiliating demolition. Sidious fought only with the power of the Force, lifting his former apprentice high into the air and crashing him down into the permacrete floor. He threw him against the courtyard wall, then lifted him again, breaking him down piece by piece until he could sense that the spirit of this Sith pretender was finally and completely broken. But death would be a mercy, and Sidious was not in a merciful mood. In a final, twisted act of poetic cruelty, he decided to inflict upon Maul the very same punishment Maul had inflicted upon Kenobi. He would not grant him a warrior's death. He would strip him of everything and let him live with the failure. "I'm not going to kill you." The Dark Lord sneered over his fallen apprentice. Maul would be restrained and taken prisoner, his empire in ashes, his brother dead, and his body and spirit shattered. He was once again nothing more than a captive, a broken tool in the hands of his creator. Maul's defeat was absolute. He was restrained and taken to the bleak outer rim world of Stygian Prime, where the Separatists maintained a high-security fortress known as the Spire. Gone was the throne, the Darksaber, the criminal empire. His new reality was a cold cell and the endless, agonizing sting of failure. But his old master's cruelty was far from over. To add a layer of profound psychological torment to his imprisonment, Sidious brought Count Dooku, the very man who had replaced him, to stand before his cell. It was a calculated act of humiliation, a master forcing his broken tool to gaze upon its shiny new replacement. One has to imagine this was as much a lesson for Dooku as it was a punishment for Maul, a stark reminder of what happens to apprentices who develop ambitions beyond their station. The torture was not merely psychological. In his cell, Dooku tormented Maul with searing blasts of force lightning, demanding to know the locations of the Pike and Black Sun leaders. The Count, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to seize control of the Shadow Collective for himself now that its leader was incapacitated. But this was all a sideshow. Sidious soon revealed his true, overarching purpose. He was using Maul as bait. He knew that Maul's mother, Talzin, was not truly gone. Though her bodily form had been destroyed in a previous attack by General Grievous, Sidious could sense her powerful spirit still roamed the haunted lands of Dathomir, and he considered the witch a significant threat to his plans. Maul was the tether he would use to finally draw her out and destroy her for good. What the Dark Lord didn't fully account for, however, was the strange, fierce loyalty Maul had managed to inspire in his followers. Back on Mandalore, the puppet Prime Minister, Almec, ordered a squad of the top Mandalorian commandos to launch a rescue mission. Led by a formidable warrior named Gar Saxon, the strike team assaulted the Spire with shocking efficiency. Death Watch rockets took out legions of Droidekas and B-2 super battle droids, while the main team blasted a hole directly into the fortress wall. They were able to extract their leader, zip-lining to freedom and escaping in a waiting Comet-class Mandalorian fighter. From there, the remnants of Maul's forces, the loyal criminals and Death Watch warriors, rallied on Zanbar, their old base from before the Mandalore coup. Almec greeted Maul, stating that this rescue was simply repayment for Maul having broken him out of his own prison. More importantly, Gar Saxon presented Maul with a familiar prize. They had managed to recover the Darksaber from the palace courtyard where it had been dropped during the duel with Sidious. Maul was not just free, he had the symbol of his rule back in his hand. But they all knew that their victory was temporary. Dooku and the Separatists would not let this stand. They prepared for the inevitable counterattack, knowing that the full might of the Separatist army could descend upon them at any moment. The war for the Shadow Collective was about to begin. The anticipated counterattack came swiftly. C-9979 Separatist drop ships descended on Zanbar, but the Mandalorian defenders were prepared. Heavy turbo laser emplacements blew many of the landing craft out of the sky before they could touch down. General Grievous, leading the assault, recognized the caliber of these fighters, noting that they were not mere clones. The battle was ferocious. Grievous and his elite Magna Guards engaged Maul, but the Dathomirian, armed with the Darksaber, was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down droid after droid. Despite his skill, the sheer, unending swarm of droids eventually overwhelmed Maul's forces. Just as he was about to be cut down, one of the Mandalorian fighters swooped in, dropping a loading ramp to rescue him in a maneuver reminiscent of his first escape from a Jedi on Tatooine. Aboard the fleeing ship, Maul meditated, reaching out through the Force to connect with his lost mother. Her spirit burst forth, using his body as a vessel to speak. It was then that the true scope of their plan was revealed. The amassing of the Shadow Collective, the taking of Mandalore, it was all part of an elaborate plot to draw Darth Sidious out into the open, to trap him and finally defeat him on Dathomir, the very world from which Maul was stolen. Assuming Sidious had let him escape to further this plan, they rallied their remaining forces at a Black Sun stronghold on Ord Mantell. There, another massive battle erupted. While his forces engaged the droids on the ground, Maul headed straight for the CIS command ship, storming the bridge and putting the Darksaber to Grievous's cyborg throat. He forced the general to issue an emergency shoot-off command, and just as the Shadow Collective was about to be overwhelmed, the entire droid army went limp. With the tables turned, they captured Count Dooku. This major victory for the underworld, however, attracted the attention of the Jedi, who arrived with Republic forces, turning the three-way battle into absolute chaos. In the confusion, Grievous escaped, and Maul was forced to free Dooku, fighting alongside him to escape the Jedi Masters Mace Windu and Aayla Secura. Both Sith managed to get away, with Maul promising Kenobi he would see him again. With Dooku once again his prisoner, Maul and the Shadow Collective retreated to Dathomir for the final phase of the plan. Hauled into the Night Sister Temple, Dooku was placed on an altar as Mother Talzin began to drain his life force, a ritual that would allow her to be made flesh once more. But the true Dark Lord had arrived, Sidious and Grievous, using Maul's old deep-cloaked scimitar, descended upon the planet. Sidious confronted Maul in the temple, taunting him that he continued to miss the lessons of the dark side. At that moment, Dooku's body rose, possessed by Talzin's spirit, and attacked the Sith Lord. The duel between these two masters of their respective dark arts was stunning, but as Talzin's fully formed body rose from the magic, Sidious knew he could not toy with her. He and Talzin became locked in a stalemate of crackling force lightning. Maul joined his mother, amplifying her power, but when Dooku awoke and added his own lightning to his master's storm, Talzin knew she had been outplayed again. Her final plan had always been a sacrifice. She knew she could not win, but she could save her son. Desperately, Maul begged her to escape with him, but she used the last of her energy to hurl him into the waiting arms of his Mandalorian allies. Her last act was to protect the child who had been stolen from her. Maul's last image of his mother was of her being impaled by General Grievous's twin sabers, her magic failing as her flesh eroded into a twisted husk. His mother's dying sacrifice had saved his life, but it had left him utterly alone. His brother was dead, his mother's spirit was extinguished, and his grand plan to defeat Darth Sidious was a smoking ruin. He was once again a fugitive, but his old master was not concerned. To Sidious, Maul was no longer a rival to be feared, but an unknowing pawn to be used one last time. Maul returned to Mandalore and regained control through his puppet Almec, believing he was going into hiding from a master who was still hunting him. He had no idea that his continued presence there was exactly what Sidious wanted. With the threat of the Night Sisters eliminated, Sidious's next greatest obstacle to a stable empire was the proud, independent warrior culture of the Mandalorians. Maul's continued rule would serve as the perfect pretext for what came next. In the final days of the Clone Wars, the Grand Army of the Republic launched the siege of Mandalore. The invasion was exactly what Bo-Katan had pleaded for, a desperate move to free her world from a Sith's grasp. The Jedi Order, alarmed by reports of a secret Sith Lord ruling a neutral system, believed Maul might have been the master they had been looking for all along, the one manipulating the entire war from the shadows. The assault was led by the former Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex, heading a division of the 501st Legion. The final battle for Mandalore was a brutal affair, but in the end, Maul would get away, escaping the chaos of Order 66, which would be issued during the battle's climax. He was once again a survivor, a ghost slipping through the cracks as the galaxy was remade in his old master's image. With the Jedi purged and the Empire risen, Maul had only one asset left to the loyal remaining members of the Shadow Collective. He retreated with them to the thick jungles and cavernous, rocky terrain of his homeworld, Dathomir. There, in the shadows, he began to rebuild. He had tried open conquest and had been crushed by a power greater than his own. He had learned the lesson that a throne makes for a very public target. Now, he would embrace the true philosophy of his former master, ruling from complete anonymity. Over the next 9 years, he transformed his coalition of criminals into a new, more refined organization called Crimson Dawn. This time, a brutish enforcer or a corrupt politician would not be enough to serve as the face of his empire. He needed someone sophisticated, charming, and utterly ruthless. A public face that could move in the highest circles of the galaxy, while the true master pulled the strings from the darkness. He found his puppet in the form of Dryden Voss, while Voss became the known leader of Crimson Dawn, building its reputation as one of the most powerful criminal empires of the era. Maul remained a phantom, his existence a secret known only to his most trusted inner circle. When this puppet was eventually killed by the scoundrel Han Solo and his associates, Maul simply promoted a new agent, a young woman named Chura, to take his place. He had finally mastered the art of being the ghost in the machine. But the Force was not done with him yet. A life spent as a clandestine crime boss was not his final destiny. An old, burning desire for revenge still smoldered, and a path was slowly beginning to form that would lead him back to the world that had started it all, the ancient Sith temple of Malachor. Years passed. The Crimson Dawn grew in power, a quiet cancer in the Emperor's galaxy. But this clandestine life was not enough to satisfy the fire that still burned in Maul's soul. Still intent on finding a way to get his ultimate revenge on Sidious, his journey eventually led him back to the ancient Sith world of Malachor, the very place where his hatred for the Jedi had been so brutally ignited as a child. It was here that he would encounter a new generation of Jedi, survivors of the great Purge Kanan Jarrus, his apprentice Ezra Bridger, and the former Jedi Ahsoka Tano. During their exploration of the dead world, Ezra was separated from his master and approached by a mysterious, cloaked figure. "Call me Old Master," the figure rasped, and with that, Maul re-entered the galactic stage. He immediately began to expertly manipulate the young Jedi, preying on his desire to do good and his frustration with the limitations of his own training. He told Ezra that he was a Force wielder, but no Jedi, a statement which led Ezra to assume he must be a Sith. Maul was quick to deny the title, not with a lie, but with a twisted version of the truth. "The Sith took everything from me," he lamented, "ripped me from my mother's arms, murdered my brother, used me as a weapon, and then cast me aside." He positioned himself as a fellow traveler, a victim of the same evil they were fighting. He was no Sith, he claimed, just a survivor whose enemies, the Emperor and his Inquisitors, were also their enemies. He led Ezra into the heart of the ancient Sith temple, explaining that its secrets could only be unlocked if they worked together, a dark echo of the rule of two that had defined his life. During one of the temple's trials, the mask of the weary old master slipped, and the Sith Lord beneath was revealed. As they struggled, he coached Ezra with words taken directly from the ancient Sith code. "Your passions give you strength, and through strength you gain power." He was not just guiding Ezra, he was attempting to indoctrinate him to take an apprentice of his own and finally be the master. He was trying to reclaim the destiny that Sidious had stolen from him. They finally reached the Holocron chamber, where Ezra, trusting his new ally, had to leap across a vast chasm, propelled only by a force push from Maul. He grabbed the Sith Holocron, and the ancient temple, dormant for 1,000 years, roared back to life. As they emerged from the temple's depths, they were met by Kanan and Ahsoka, who had captured one of the Emperor's Inquisitors. They were soon joined by two more, the fifth brother and seventh sister. Seeing the unfolding chaos, Maul seemed genuinely amused. To prove his alliance with the Jedi, he made a declaration. Formerly Darth, he announced, "Now, just Maul." Ahsoka, who had seen him rise from the shadows once before, was deeply suspicious. "What game are you playing?" she demanded. Maul warned them all that Darth Vader himself would soon arrive, and that their only hope was to ascend to the temple's peak and unlock its power. As they fought their way up, the final betrayal began. Maul tried to push Ezra to the dark side, urging him to strike down the helpless seventh sister. When the boy refused, Maul's patience ran out. He dispatched the fifth brother with ease, and then, when Kanan asked where his apprentice had gone, Maul's shrewd plan was laid bare. "You mean my apprentice?" he sneered. He lunged at Kanan, not with a killing blow, but with a strike of unimaginable cruelty. Kanan pulled back just in time to save his life, but the crimson blade of Maul's saber sliced across his face, melting his eyes. The pure red of a Sith weapon was the last thing Kanan Jarrus would ever see. Maul's betrayal was as swift as it was cruel, but he had underestimated the resilience of a Jedi truly connected to the light. On that dark world, the newly blinded Kanan Jarrus had to completely give in to the Force, letting it guide his every action. In a stunning display of skill and faith, he countered Maul's attacks and hurled the former Sith from the edge of the temple. While Darth Vader arrived to confront Ahsoka Tano, Maul, ever the survivor, managed to commandeer an Inquisitor's TIE fighter and escape the collapsing temple. He had the Sith Holocron, and a dangerous new idea had taken root in his mind. But Ezra's use of the dark side to open the Holocron had created a vulnerability, a crack in his mind that Maul could sense from across the galaxy. Months went by, but the act of opening the Holocrons had intertwined their minds in a way neither of them understood. Similar to, but less powerful than, the Force dyad connection seen in later eras, memories were shared, and a bond across time and space was forged between them. While Maul meditated on this connection, tracking his apprentice, Ezra began to experience haunting visions of the old Zabrak. Eventually, Maul located the rebel fleet and captured the entire crew of Kanan's ship, the Ghost. He offered them a trade their lives in exchange for both the Sith Holocron and Kanan's Jedi Holocron. Seeing his friends threatened, Kanan agreed. While Kanan and Ezra went to retrieve the Sith artifact, Maul made himself at home on their ship, taking a disturbing interest in their lives and belongings. He even used his militarized Raiswata 100-ton tour guide droids, relics from his time as ruler of Mandalore, as his guards. The Jedi returned with the Holocron and met Maul at the Rendezvous Point, an old Mandalorian asteroid outpost, the very same base where he had once held both Count Dooku and General Grievous captive. In a command room, the old Sith and the young Jedi sat on the floor and began the ritual. As they meditated, the immense knowledge contained within the dark and light side devices began to open up to them. Maul explained that when merged, this combination of wisdom could provide the answer to any question one might seek. They both focused on the same burning question: what was the key to destroying the Sith? As the Force provided glimpses of an answer, a vision began to form between them. But the vision was fragmented, filtered through their own desires. Maul, seeking a weapon, grew frantic, seeing only glimpses of his own empty fate, crying out, "I see nothing." Ezra, however, seeking hope, began to see a planet with two suns. Maul pushed him to see more, to peer deeper beyond the veil, but at that moment, Kanan and the rest of the crew burst in, breaking their concentration. The ritual was violently broken, creating an explosion of pure force power. In the ensuing chaos, Maul escaped, nearly driven mad by the vision, repeating a single, obsessive phrase, "E-lives." The ritual had failed to give them a clear answer, but it had succeeded in doing something far more dangerous. It had permanently linked their minds, ensuring their intertwined destinies would lead them both to that desert planet with the twin suns. The broken ritual had left a permanent scar on the Force, intertwining the minds of the old Sith and the young Jedi. Maul now haunted Ezra's waking moments, appearing as a convincing vision that only he could see. Using this psychic link, Maul lured Ezra to his homeworld of Dathomir, promising that they could complete the vision they had started if they worked together. There, in the wreckage of the Night Sister Temple, he tried to bond with the orphan boy, showing him the relics of his former glories. A Mandalorian helmet, treasures from his time as a crime lord, and most disturbingly, a shrine to the moment he got his revenge on Kenobi, with artwork of Duchess Satine scarred and the very Darksaber used to kill her resting below. He convinced Ezra to participate in a Night Sister ritual using a dark side altar to merge their minds once more. This time, the vision was clear. They both saw the answer to their shared question, how to destroy the Sith. The answer was a desert planet with twin suns. For Maul, this was a revelation. He now knew his arch-enemy was alive, and he knew where to find him. But as the spirits of the dead Night Sisters demanded a price for their magic, Ezra chose to save his friends rather than pursue this path to power, destroying the altar and escaping Dathomir. But the damage was done. Maul had his destination. He spent the next month searching the endless sand dune seas of Tatooine, his all-consuming want for vengeance once again driving him to the brink of madness. But he knew Ezra was his final key. Back with the rebellion, Ezra, guided by the fragmented Jedi and Sith Holocrons, realized that Maul had gone to Tatooine to hunt Kenobi and defied orders to go and warn him. This was precisely Maul's plan. He used the boy as bait, a lure he knew the noble Jedi Master could not ignore. After Kenobi rescued Ezra from a band of Tusken Raiders, Maul tracked them to a small campfire in the desert night. The final confrontation was not a clash of armies or a storm of rage, but a quiet, somber meeting of two old men forever linked by a single moment 30 years prior. Kenobi calmly rose, his face etched with a kind of peaceful understanding. He saw Maul not as a monster, but as a wounded creature. Another life destroyed by the Sith. Maul, however, was still consumed by his hatred until he hit upon the one truth that would force Kenobi's hand. The visions had shown him more than just a hermit. They had shown him the hermit's purpose. He revealed that he knew why Kenobi was on this desolate world. He was protecting something, or rather, someone. At that, Kenobi knew their story had to end. He could not permit this secret to escape. He ignited his blue blade. All of Maul's training, his criminal empires, his study of ancient rituals, had all led to this single moment. The battle that followed lasted only 3 seconds. A swift series of saber strikes, a feint, a parry, and a final, efficient movement brought Kenobi's blade down through the center of Maul's saber staff and through his chest. As he collapsed, finally and truly defeated, Kenobi dropped down and held the man who had haunted him for decades. In that final moment, Maul asked one last question. "Tell me," he rasped, "is he the chosen one?" Kenobi looked at him and, with a quiet sadness, confirmed, "He is." A flicker of something like peace crossed Maul's face. "He will avenge us," he whispered, and then he was gone. Maul had once said he would not die until he had his vengeance. and in a way, he had received it. He died knowing that the Sith Lord who had ripped him from his mother filled him with rage and discarded him would finally be killed. And in the ultimate irony, that downfall would come at the hands of an apprentice trained by his own arch-enemy, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The duel of fates was finally over. Kenobi gently closed the eyes of the man who had murdered his master and the love of his life, and later built a proper funeral pyre, just like the one for Qui-Gon Jinn on Naboo. Maul's legacy. A life defined by a legacy of rage would be recorded by the Whills as that of a being of great galactic importance, a tragic and pivotal figure in the endless war between the light and the dark.